Welcome to the GETI 2026 Intelligence Briefing from EventZR Advisory. Today, the State of Global Event Tourism 2026, part of the 105 Report Global Event Tourism Index. If you're tuning into this, you're likely a CVB director, a tourism minister, or maybe a sovereign investor. And honestly, the intelligence we're unpacking today reveals exactly why the strategies you're probably relying on are fundamentally incomplete for the vast majority of destination portfolios. We're talking about massive structural flaws here. Flaws that are going to absolutely dictate how capital flows across this industry for the next decade. Right, let's jump straight into the baseline. We assessed 255 countries across 9 infrastructure dimensions and 3 composite layers. And the global average ETI score? It's 48.08 out of 100. Let that sink in. That is literally a failing grade. More than half the destinations out there haven't even hit the theoretical midpoint of readiness. They are flying blind, pouring billions into physical assets without having the institutional capacity or the market intelligence to actually back them up. Look, event tourism is a $1.5 trillion global engine, but most nations are structurally unequipped to capture that capital, which means they bleed market share instantly to a highly concentrated handful of elite markets. Exactly. And the disparity between those elite markets and everyone else is just severe. We're looking at a 6.4x performance multiplier between the 21 A-tier elite nations and the E-tier markets dragging at the bottom. This isn't your standard bell curve, it's a sheer cliff. That 6.4x ratio is the quantified difference between a destination that can effortlessly process 10,000 visas in a week, light up 5G across every single venue, and host a 50,000-person congress, versus a market where a standard 500-person conference causes a complete logistical meltdown. For anyone directing sovereign capital, this disparity is your reality. You're either capturing this multiplier or you're just funding the gap. So, to really understand why this gap exists and how capital gets trapped, we use the L1 to L2 gap diagnostic. This is the immediate lens top-tier strategists use to measure the friction between your concrete and your content. Layer 1 is your infrastructure readiness, your physical venues, your digital backbone, your policy environment. It basically answers, can you host? Layer 2, on the other hand, is your events portfolio quality. This is the actual, validated international events landing in your market. It answers, are you hosting? The friction, or the gap, between these two layers is the single biggest predictor of a destination's long-term trajectory. Let's apply that lens to a real market. Take Rwanda as our first case study. Back in 2016, they opened the Kigali Convention Center. We're talking a $300 million investment, a 2,600-capacity venue, beautiful architecture, multi-language translation tech, the works. Yet their composite GETI score sits at 38.4. They're stuck firmly in the C tier. Why? Because their Layer 1 infrastructure surplus is outpacing their Layer 2 event quality by nearly 9 points. They built massive supply without generating the corresponding demand to fill it. In our world, that equals severely underutilized capital and heavy maintenance liabilities. For any Minister of Finance listening, understanding this misalignment is absolutely critical before you sign off on the next mega venue. Spot on. And if we project this trajectory forward to 2028, the outlook for similar C-tier markets is incredibly stark. Destinations relying solely on a hardware-heavy strategy are walking straight into a dead capital trap. Think about it. By 2026, all that capital is deployed. By 2027, the L2 portfolio stagnates because you can't just market an empty hall. And by 2028, those physical venues transform into severe financial liabilities. If you don't anchor your demand first through a targeted acquisition strategy, that expensive concrete simply depreciates. Building it definitely does not mean they will come. Now, contrast that dead capital trap with our second case study, South Africa. They pulled off a highly competitive B+ tier score of 67.89. The strategic pivot here is crucial. Cape Town expanded the CTICC by 31,000 square meters, but they did it following anchored demand. They already had massive properties like World Economic Forum Africa and AfricaCom locked into their portfolio. Because of that, their Layer 2 actually outpaces their Layer 1 by 4 points. The physical expansion worked specifically because the events were already there. The capital followed the demand, which meant immediate ROI rather than sitting around hoping for bookings. Here's what this means for someone actually running a destination portfolio or advising a tourism minister. Capital must follow demand. Constructing massive infrastructure without an anchored event tourism portfolio guarantees you'll hit a middle-income trap. Right now, there are roughly 80 countries stuck in this 45 to 60 scoring band. And honestly, it is the most dangerous place to exist in the global index. You're carrying the debt load of a major destination, but you don't have the high-yield event properties to actually service it. You're functional, sure, but you aren't distinct enough to win bids against the B-plus and A-tier markets above you. You're burning budget on physical scale when the battle has completely moved elsewhere. So the question is, how do you break out of that trap? That brings us to the digital capability multiplier. Density over landmass. And Singapore proves this point conclusively. Look, you cannot build a $500 million venue in 6 months, but you absolutely can reconstruct your digital capability multiplier in that time. Singapore has a highly constrained physical landmass of just 733 square kilometers, but they maintain an elite A-tier score of 79.29. How? Their digital readiness index is a massive 92.5. They've integrated holographic technology requiring zero imported equipment, automated their attendee analytics, and built seamless event tech ecosystems. This case study completely proves that digital density per square meter obliterates physical scale limits. If you're constrained by urban density, this is your blueprint. They aren't winning on concrete, they're winning on operational frictionlessness. Exactly right. And when we project this out to the 2028 to 2030 timeline, there is a very clear digital deployment pathway. Trying to hit A-tier status using concrete takes a decade of construction, environmental review, zoning, you name it. But executing these digital steps, integrating event tech platforms, deploying AI and holographic operations, and digitally connecting your entire national portfolio into one ecosystem, that amplifies your event tourism competitiveness in just 12 to 18 months. For mid-tier markets, this is literally the highest ROI lever you can pull right now to leapfrog those traditional physical limitations. Uniting the diagnostics from Rwanda, South Africa, and Singapore brings us to the 2030 structural shift. The EventCI GETI data makes one thing clear. Future competitiveness relies entirely on the precise intersection of validated demand and ecosystem safety. We call this intersection the compound multiplier. By the time we hit 2030, nations scoring over 60 in tourism demand intelligence and over 70 in safety and well-being will hit A-tier or B-plus classification at 4.2 times the base rate. And you cannot fake this. Neither dimension works in isolation. If you have excellent demand intelligence but poor safety scores, you attract interest you just can't convert. If you have outstanding safety but zero demand intelligence, you're basically building a fortress for a market you haven't identified. But if you activate both simultaneously, that's your 4.2x competitive advantage. You're no longer competing on square footage. You're competing on integrated risk management and predictive demand models. Building on that, this structural shift strictly dictates who captures the capital flowing toward 2030 and who falls permanently behind the tier borders. It's cut and dry. The clear winners will be destinations deploying integrated digital ecosystems and those curating culturally distinct Layer 2 portfolios that competitors simply cannot replicate. Conversely, those legacy concrete overbuilders who lack a core strategy alongside climate-vulnerable legacy assets are going to rapidly fall behind. The math here is ruthless. The methodology heavily penalizes imitation and massively rewards distinct localized capability. EventCR Advisory works with destinations and tourism boards to turn this intelligence into competitive strategy. If you're making hosting, investment, or positioning decisions without this depth of data, you're working with an incomplete picture. We partner with convention bureaus, national tourism organizations, and event associations to co-create intelligence. Start at eventsr.com/advisory. This is one of 105 GETI 2026 briefings. Share it with a colleague who needs to hear this. This has been a GETI 2026 intelligence briefing from EventCR. Make decisions with data, not intuition.